Shit. S for shit. And what is shit?
Yeah.
It's fertilizer, isn't it? You shit in the loo,
Yeah.
and it gets processed, dumped on the land, and then the new carrot grows, we eat that and we shit and goes on the land, and the next carrot grows as well. So every time we've had trouble in life, it's fucking shit. You know, you say life is really shit. Yeah. And is that a terrible thing? Well, of course it is. No, it's fucking fertilizer. If you use it in the right mindset, then you will learn from it. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to ask, I pre-warned you.
It's pretty much the same as what I just said.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
It's it's not the mistake that I'm interested in. That was the shit bit, but it's a trigger for improvement. Yeah,
exactly. How is it fertilizing the learning opportunity and the magic of it? So I am here with my lovely friend Mark Evers. Now, Mark and I have known each other for, I don't know, probably I would say nearly 20 years. Mark was one of my training instructors on this Boeing 737 when we were working for Thomson or TUI together. And I've always held him at the top level in terms of the people that have influenced me, because it was so enjoyable. There was no trying to prove a point. It was just, how you doing, Ben? Let's go together. I'm not senior to you. You're not junior. We're all on the same level. We're going on the same journey, and let's learn a few things together. It was a very inclusive thing, and I've really respect that. It taught me a lot about how I can try and influence other people. So Mark's going to give us a little bit of a bio of the journey that he's been on. Mark is a training captain on the 737. He's helped 6 airlines set up. He's very into the safety management system and compliance, and steering companies and individuals towards finding the very best in themselves. And I think for him, it's not an orientation between corporate improvement. It's about human improvement that everybody benefits from. So welcome, Mark. It's lovely to have you with me.
Thank you. Good to see you again. Yes.
Absolutely. So give us a little bit of a background of your flying journey.
Sure. Yeah. So I started my journey back in 1994. Shows my age, but there we go. I ended up going from Holland to Los Angeles for a year to do all my flight training there. And at the end of that year, I came back as an instructor, FAA instructor. I then had to go and convert my licenses, which I was going to do in Holland. I decided to do it in the UK. There was just more opportunities. My girlfriend at the time was English, and I went to the UK, converted my licenses, became a flying instructor at High Wycombe. Did that for a year and a half. Ended up flying a turbo commander for an aristocrat in the UK. Did that for about 20 years. But about a year and a half into my instructor's role, I got a job with Britannia Airways on the 757 as a second officer. And then 6 months later, I was on the 767, starting long haul. I did that for about 5 years, I think. And then got my command on the 737 out of Coventry, where TUI had started a low-cost kind of arm to the Thomson brand. I was at Coventry for about 6 months. I think I was in the company actually in the left-hand seat for a few weeks, when I then got the tick to become a line trainer. So fairly soon after having moved from the right-hand seat, I went back into the right-hand seat to go and teach people again. And then became a TRE, ended up in training standards for a while. And then in May last year, I took voluntary redundancy with TUI to focus more on my consultancy side. And then the airline, Ascend Airways, called me up and said, we need some help. And so I helped start that up. And I'm now their director of flight operations for them. It's just been an incredible journey. It's been unbelievably satisfying and fun working with a fantastic team. And so that's where we are now. That's me in a nutshell.
It's brilliant. It's very, very humble. I look at your CV and of course beforehand I know a little bit about you, but obviously I'd look on LinkedIn, and And you see these profiles and think, oh my God, I'm never going to get to that level of achievement. And you realize actually when we start out, we have no idea where the journey is going to. We just have this concept, this idea. I want to fly airplanes. I want to become a sportsman. I want to learn how to play tiddlywinks really easily. We don't actually know what the shape of the journey is going to take place, and we're going to be diverting all over the place and landing at different places all the time. I mean, did you expect to be in this very senior position of providing very high level consultation to airlines?
No, if you'd said to me, let's say 10 years ago, oh, Mark, you're going to be involved with airlines, you're going to be a consultant, you're going to be an advisor to the board of directors for I don't know how many different airlines, I would have said, really? I don't think so. That's not me. But it just kind of happened. And I think it comes from almost like a common sense kind of a place, really. If you don't start talking a lot of rubbish and try and look particularly important or knowledgeable or anything like that when you're not, I think you just very quickly lose credibility. If you just, in my case, me is me, and that's, what you see is what you get. If I think something is right, I will say so. I'll try and say it in a nice way. Being Dutch, we can be quite direct. It was one of the things I had to learn when I first came over. But yeah, I think if you can just think about what you do, what you say, how you say it, think about how it's received, I think then it just sets a certain sort of, I don't know, precedent, or how do people perceive you? I think that's quite important, how you come across. And I think if you're not come across particularly overbearing, but you know what you're talking about, and you talk sense, you don't start saying that you know something if you don't. On a daily basis, say, I'm not sure, I'll find out. I think if you can do it that way, it makes a difference.
I think that's bang on, isn't it? Because I think about my own personal journey is, I think we've been socialized for most of humanity to be right. The bloke has to be right. You have to go out and be the thrusting goal achiever. And if we can't do that, then we don't have the value that's needed for the community. So when we get something wrong, this whole idea about failing and making mistakes is still an incredibly emotionally difficult thing to face. And I certainly know that for me, thinking, well, I haven't come up to scratch in terms of somebody else's expectations. And I was always trying to satisfy an outward impression about what success was all about, clutching around in the wind, flapping around in the wind, not quite sure who I was, where I was, and being emotionally hijacked, I think, a little bit when I made a mistake, and definitely tried to hide away from it by pretending I knew probably more than I did, instead of thinking, actually, that's an incredibly anxious place to be operating, and reduces the potential for performing in a brilliant way. So, and it prevents the creativity, as you're kind of suggesting. You go in with an idea that haven't got everything wrong. I'm on a journey to discover something new here, rather than restricting with the proving a point type thing.
Yeah, and I think that from a self-improvement point of view, if you're, every time you go into a company, it could be a company in Saudi Arabia, it could be one in Oman, it could be one in Ireland, it could be Norway, wherever. I've been to lots of different places. There are cultural differences. And I think if you allow yourself to just observe people first before you start talking, just observe them, just have a look at what's important to them, and then try and satisfy that, and almost fall in line a little bit really with their culture and their procedures, etc. Then I think it's much easier. It's much easier to communicate. It's much easier to, rather than barging in somewhere and trying to impart knowledge when they haven't even asked for it. It's, I think it's a really bad habit, is to walk in and look at me. This is how much I know. They might not even want to know that. They might not even be ready for that. And I think if you just let them talk and allow them the time to set the scene, because normally when you first meet somebody, they want to set the scene. They want to create that little environment in which they want to be happy, which is a very common thing for people to do, is they want to create their little environment. But if you walk in, barge in, and disturb that process, it's almost like you've just slapped them in the face. And invariably it doesn't work.
So why do you think people do that? Why do you think people barge in and charge in and say, this is what I know, this is what I'm going to deliver to you, this is the solution? It's that default of going in and...
Yeah, I think it comes down to a deep desire within people to satisfy their ego. Ego is in my opinion, it's a terrible thing. It's egos are the ones that stop process, progress, anything like that. It's because it becomes a self-fulfilling kind of a thing where it's all about me. Well, actually, if you're sitting in front of the client, it should really all be about them. They have a problem. They need a solution. It's got to be their environment. And if I can create an environment in which they can succeed, then I've done my job. But if I go in there trying to create an environment in which I can succeed, great, I might walk out feeling fantastic, but they might sit there and go, that wasn't really what we wanted. So I think ego is the almost like the blocker. If you can get rid of your ego, if you can actually look at yourself and say, why do I need to satisfy this need for other people to tell me how bloody wonderful I am? If you can get on top of that, then things will change. It's an incredible thing to learn, actually, and it's probably one of the most difficult things to learn, is to be able to just say, actually, where can I get my satisfaction from? If I look around the room and everybody's nodding and excited and, oh my God, that's the answer, and yes, we need to do it this way, without you having enforced your own sort of, what's the word? Trying to satisfy your own needs, you're not going to get that reaction. But it's that reaction that's satisfying. It's not the feeling you get after you've said something particularly profound or what you think is profound. That's an empty sort of a satisfaction. I think it lasts a couple of seconds and it ebbs away. But if people are excited about what you say and you've given them a solution and it works for them and it's tailored to them, that is a much more lasting kind of a satisfaction because it lingers. And that's all because you haven't gone in there trying to satisfy something for yourself. You're trying to satisfy their needs. And you see that in training all the time. If you can, I always say there are two instructors. The one instructor creates an environment in which he can teach, and the other instructor creates an environment in which the student can learn. And which one do you want to be? I would want to be the latter. I want to be the one that creates an environment in which the person can learn, not the one who can create an environment in which he can teach. Because that might not match up with what the student needs.
Absolutely. And that's exactly how I felt, to blow smoke up your backside again, was that you created the environment for me to learn. So, I just walked in it again. It's down to the whole enjoyment thing. And I just realized that it wasn't about you proving a point. So we've talked about this before. This is my new concept I'm coming up with. Just to explain it to people who are listening now, I've got these two sayings. One is which when you are a leader, or when you have the ability to influence somebody or impact somebody, we have to decide whether we want to help other people pop or whether we want to result in pap. So pop is the symbology of it is the champagne, cork comes off, great celebration, and pop, P-O-P-P, stands for promote other people's potential. It's about looking out. It's creating an environment for somebody else to thrive. Yeah. Whereas the PAP thing, as you say, it aligns with your first idea of being the teacher, is how can I prove a personal point? And that's the thing. We go in and we keep small. I'm trying to satisfy my personal ego, and PAP, if you think about it, is the remnants of a piece of fruit when it's had all the juice taken out, or the elixir of enjoyment and wonder that somebody else is benefiting from. You're left with the pap, which nobody really wants to deal with, and it's very limiting. So I think again, it's the ego, it's the emotional the basic emotional need to be verified or validated, because in the jungle all those years ago, if we didn't get someone recognizing us and thinking we're valuable, you got left out to be struck by the weather or eaten by the lion, or the kind of stuff I usually talk about. So I think it's a very basic operating system, but we have this incredible part of our brain, the neocortex, which is a muscle, and the more we exercise it, the bigger it gets and the more powerful we become to be able to influence other people. So thinking about other people as opposed to what we can do, what do other people need, and how can I then be flexible to adjust around it, as opposed to you have to do this and you have to do that. So my next idea with that is that we work in an environment where standard operating procedures and checklists are very strict. And I inherently feel when I go into an organization thinking, well, these SOPs and the checklists are great, but am I allowed to express myself as an individual? Am I allowed to be seen with individual flesh and have something on top of those standard operating procedures, the framework, the skeleton, which is important, as we well know. But I think, there's a lot of people I've found, and I haven't been in the strict training role like you and examining role like you, but of course I'm in a position of experience now, and I'm in a position of mentoring, whether it be in the flight deck or outside of my own personal life. And how do I allow other people to breathe independently? And in our business, you must have seen this thousands of times in the flight deck. People are so scared, don't want to take the risk of coming outside of the standard operating procedures, and then they're just trying to fit someone else's expectation of flying an airplane and keeping small, and then not being able to deal with the situation in their own unique way. I mean, how would you guide somebody to say, listen, you're an individual, stick with the SOPs, but don't be afraid to add your extra bit to it? What would you, how did you go about that? Because you did it with me.
I look at I tend to look at SOPs as a garden path. So it's a little sort of like a stone path through your garden. And every now and then you can go on the grass. That's okay. Just don't go over the garden walls, because that would be a violation. So it's a fine line, isn't it? And the way that you walk down that garden path, are we going to walk down that garden path absolutely rigidly between the two of us? We don't say anything to each other. It's just not allowed. We can't sort of have our own characters and have a laugh. The way I would like to walk down that garden path is for us to be absolutely 100% comfortable walking down it together, having a laugh as we do that, but we stick to the SOP as we do that. Because if you can be comfortable with the SOP in the first place, then there is spare capacity to do then the other good things that we should be doing as flight crew, and that is to build a relationship very quickly. We have to do that within minutes in a crew room. If you come across somebody you've never seen before, particularly if they are quite junior, they look at somebody like us who've got a lot of experience, like they think you've got 16 stripes up your arm instead of 4. So they look, quite a long way up. And you got to break down those barriers. You've got to break them down. You've got to just say to these people, actually, at one point I had a very junior first officer sitting next to me, and he was actually shaking a little bit. He was that nervous. And I just put on the 7-3, you can put your seat right down. So it just literally clunks down, and you sit right on the bottom. And I did that. And he sort of looked at me and went, what happened here? I said, I'm just trying to get a cockpit gradient a little bit better. It's a bit steep.
Brilliant.
And there is no need for it.
I love it. Absolutely love it.
It's, going back to the SOP bit, yes, it is. It's a fantastic framework so that we can fly with everybody and anyone from all different backgrounds. But it's how you, as a person, then present yourself again as in a way that there is room for maneuver by that other person, and that they actually feel confident to say something. The guys that I flew with from Stansted come in from our walk around, and I say, can I help with anything? And they say, actually, Mark, it's better if you just sit there and drink a coffee. It's much quicker that way. But, I've at that time, I was quite a senior guy in TUI Airways, but for me, that was the most beautiful thing I would hear that day, because it meant that they didn't feel intimidated. So to me, that was like, oh, that's perfect, fantastic. They're not nervous, they're being themselves, and that means that we're going to get better performance, probably, in my humble opinion. Rather than them sitting there all on edge and walking on eggshells and thinking they have to jump through hoops which just aren't there. So it's interesting, isn't it? It's sort of the interaction between people on the flight deck and how quickly pilots can form some sort of a working relationship it's quite unique, I think. It sometimes takes a year for people to build up a bond outside of aviation in industries that are not used to the skills and the CRM kind of tools that we have. And I think most pilots are pretty good at that. They can strike up a relationship quite quickly and make it work. It's quite unique, actually. If you look in the surgical
world, unique.
That's absolutely not the case.
No, I think that's a good analogy. And thinking about it, because Leo Nugent, my mate, who you know, Leo from TUI, he was on earlier on the podcast a couple of months ago, and he talked about the same thing, that what we're trying to do is break down as many barriers as quickly as possible in the flight deck. So you remove the potential obstacles to bad performance, as it were, and lead to that effective friendship very quickly. Because as soon as you build friendship, you have confidence in each other. There's a big difference for me in terms of trust, because trust can be broken very easy. It's a contractual thing. It's actually limiting. I think it's about confidence. We're in a situation now where I'm confident that whatever happens, we will be able to deal with it. There's no contract here. There's no guaranteed outcomes, but I have confidence that we are now in a position to work together rather than against each other because of our individual emotional needs to prove a personal point. How do we promote each other's personal potential? And I think, yes, it's very claustrophobic, isn't it? It's very claustrophobic in that environment. We sit next to each other with only a few inches apart for hours and hours on end, having got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and the baby's been screaming all night long, and the relationship between the wife is difficult, and somebody at home is also ill, and then we can't go and sit in the loo and have a secret cigarette or just take ourselves out of it. We have to be sitting there, and we are forced into that situation. How do we make the best of this particular situation? So I also think that gives us the opportunity to lead other people. If we can get that right, the effective metaphor for that, we're on this incredible journey together towards a successful mission, whatever that is. We have the ability, if we get that right, then we can support other people to do the same. And that's the reason for this podcast, effectively. Uncovering the aviation mindset. If we can get that right in aviation.
Yeah. I think the other thing that a lot of people struggle with is to weigh up what's important, what's not. A lot of people, there's a drama every 5 minutes, and when you actually ask them what's going on, and you look at that, but half of that stuff you have no control over, so why are you worrying about it? It's having that filter of allowing certain things to worry you and other things not to worry you. So there might be certain elements within your life that you just absolutely have no control over, no matter what you do. If you worry about it or not, the outcome is going to be the same. So you've got to be pretty disciplined with yourself to then eliminate that or to filter that out, because it has no bearing on your well-being at all. It's just making you feel rubbish, or it's making you feel worried or whatever. But if you have no control over it, you've got to learn to filter that out and say, okay, well, this is an item that I have no control over. Can't do anything with that. I can't influence it. Life will be what it will be. Move on. Think about something that's far more interesting or gives you joy in life again, whatever that might be. You got to divert yourself away from that, because otherwise you'll end up going around and around in circles. And I see people do it all the time. And when you ask them, what do you worry about? You say, but you have no control over that. So why worry about it? You see what I mean? It's a really interesting part of our brain, I think, where it leads us down a path where you think, why did I even go down that path? I got no control over this. It's nonsense. But that's not easy. It's not easy. That's
no, it's not.
I think that takes years of physically developing yourself in that area, is to say, got no control over that. That's it. It's the same as some people, they're worried about their kids driving down the road. Unless you go and sit there in the car with them, or you stop them driving altogether, you've got no control over that. It's a barrier almost, isn't it? And that doesn't mean that you don't give in, you don't care about your kids, but it's really not something you have control over. If you walk outside of your door and somebody, some drunkard or whatever is lost control of his car, it's the end of you. You've got no control over that. It's one of them things.
I think you're right. Basically, if you're not prepared to again, if you're limiting someone else's potential, if you don't allow them just to go and take a risk themselves, then it's going to limit their potential. And of course, we will never become innovative or creative or come up with a solution. We'll just go backwards, and everything will become a nightmare. And before we know it, we've got the chains of restriction, and weighing us down, we drown effectively. And again, it's that whole idea we're in an industry where safety is always promoted as the number one thing, which we well know about. And there can be that tendency to introduce the SOPs, the standard operating procedures, and the checklists in order to eliminate risk. But there's that saying about
on a daily basis.
Apply to yeah, we do it, don't we? And as I say, the boat, similar thing to some quote I heard about boats. An airplane and its occupants are always safer on the ground, but that's not what it's designed for. It's designed to go on this incredible journey. So we have to be prepared to take a risk. And we're sitting on the end of the runway of wherever we are, but I call it the runway of potential. And we've got to be prepared to take a risk, to fire off down that runway and know that we aren't guaranteed the outcome and that there might be a problem, there might be an emergency, but having faith, probability is favorably in our court that we can actually do something about it. And of course, that depends on how many people we've made the most of and who's had the input, and have we had the right advice? Have we done the right personal maintenance? As you say, working on yourself, working on your self-awareness and what triggers us and why we react in a certain way. It gives us a better chance to deal with the obstacles, the thunderstorms, the mountains, etc., that suddenly come in our path. But totally. I still think that people are just racked by this idea, I can't take a risk. This is what's happening in society at the moment, the whole health and safety idea. Then COVID comes along and says, don't take a risk. So the youngsters, bless their hearts, are being told, if you take a risk, everything's going to be over. But then there's no creative element that comes out the back of it.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't see risk either. They just don't recognize it. And I think you just got to always try and analyze something and say, if I do this, what would be the outcome? So you actually start thinking ahead a little bit rather than just doing it and then thinking about it afterwards. And there's a fine balance there because, you got the greens, the yellows, and the reds and the blues. I don't know if you heard that analogy with people that have these 4 different character traits and some crossover into others. Some people, they just overthink everything because they have to, analyze it to the nth degree. And actually it becomes, it results in complete inaction because they just can't stop overthinking it. Whereas other people are just gung ho and they go like, I thought about that. Poof, they do it. And then, then they got to deal with the aftermath. Whereas if you can strike some sort of a balance there, then, it's the way to do it. But you see it all the time. You see people, they overthink and then they think about it again, or you need to give them almost like a written instruction to do something because some people you can say, for example, Ben, can you just go and do this? And you got to, I'll do that. And you know what to do. But it could well be where I say to you, Ben, can you go and do this? You got to, but boss, tell me more. But, how do I do it? When do I do it? At what time? how do I feed that back to you? And they just need every little detail in order to go and do a task. And as long as you're aware of that, that's fine. Because then you just make sure that when you do talk to that person, you give them the right instruction. You do give them all that information. It's their environment, isn't it? You're working with. It just comes right back to that environment again. It's got to be right for them. And I think as a manager, if you can create an environment in which they can do their job, then you set the right scene. Because if we go back to the blues and the greens and the reds and the yellows, then you've got to almost create that red environment or that yellow environment or that green, even if that's not your environment. That doesn't matter. That's immaterial. I could be uncomfortable, for example, if I was in a green or a particularly blue environment. But that doesn't mean I can't be in that environment. If that means that as the manager, I'm a little bit uncomfortable in that environment, okay, that's fine. But I'm just going to have to create their environment because I'm asking them to do the job. I'm not saying I'm going to do the job on your behalf. So if I want to delegate as a manager, I'm going to have to understand the fact that I may have to adjust the way I present tasks to people. If I present a task to you, that might be completely different in the way I present it to you than if I presented it to somebody else who I know needs that extra bit of information. Okay, I might not feel that I particularly have the time to give that extra bit of information or to hold their hand a little bit. Okay, well, if I don't hold their hand, we're going to do it twice. So maybe I might have to just hold their hand for a little bit, but that is the task that is bestowed on me as the manager, is that I have to be able to do that. I have to be able to recognize that, to see that this person is slightly different to that person. So I need to instruct them slightly differently and I need to guide them slightly differently. That's it. So it's not actually rocket science.
I think that's absolutely bang on. No, it's not, is it really? And again, we talk about situational awareness in our industry. It's the number one thing. Are you aware of the engine parameters, the hydraulic parameters in the aeroplane? Are you aware of a mountain that's just over there at 2:00? Are you aware of a thunderstorm that's at 9:00 on your screen? Are you aware of how your captain or co-pilot is feeling? Have they slept well? Have they got problems at home? How is the flight attendant? Have they just shoved coffee in your face and what's going on there? The whole idea of being able to adapt to those particular circumstances. One of my analogies is the idea that the core of the aeroplane, the tube of the aeroplane, is so incredibly strong that it's able to withstand immense pressures and stresses on it. We go up to 51,000 feet in our particular aeroplane, and the pressure on the aeroplane is just immense because you're dealing with the being able to breathe up at that level. But on the side of the aeroplane are these incredible wings that if they were rigid, you'd be sick any second. It would just bump you around, but it absorbs the bumps and allows you to ride as smoothly as possible. So it's having that real strong core ability and being able to be flexible to the environment, which is exactly what you're saying, is going in and deciding I'm going to read this room before I go in and suddenly puke my ideas, or talk about this, puking your ideas onto other people. And then you end up contaminating them because they've got to undo all that before they can clean themselves up and be able to operate on their own. And going back to your idea of the blues, greens, and the yellows, or amber and red, I use that as an analogy a lot. Is that if we think about it for those non-aviation individuals, we on our screens we have lots of blue contacts of other airplanes being around, that's great, excellent. We're all in this environment together, and it's very useful. We just got to be aware of where everybody is, just in case. And then suddenly you get this yellow that comes up. And it's telling you, we're getting a bit close. We could have a potential collision. And then when that's a cautionary stage, and then the red stage is, holy shit, we've got to do something, otherwise we're going to be in problems. And actually, I had that for real. Here's quite a useful example. I was flying from Chicago DuPage Airport to Chicago O'Hare, and Chicago is one of the busiest air traffic areas in the world. And we took off from the little airport. The ATC guys speak incredibly quickly in America, as you're very aware of. And they give you these instructions, and you got to bloody well keep up. So we take off from the northerly side of the DuPage airport. They tell us to turn left and then turn right towards Chicago O'Hare. And the ATC guy, the air traffic controller, just said, "Do you see the airport there? The northerly runway is yours to land on." And you're thinking, my God, there's how many 6 or 8 runways at this airport? Is like, you're literally just going to let me go for it. Anyway, when we turned, I was in the left-hand seat and the co-pilot was in the right-hand seat. And he sees an aeroplane on the right-hand side. It comes up on our screen, then goes yellow. When you think, okay, we're fine. Everything's groovy. We're about to line up for a visual approach, which can be challenging. And then suddenly we get the red TCAS warning, and it shouts at us, as you have done plenty of times in the simulator, says, pull up, pull up, pull up. Shit, I wasn't expecting that. In the left-hand seat, I'm doing the radios. The guy in the right-hand seat is doing the flying. And he's like, shit, what do we do? Because he could actually see it out of his shoulder. And I just said, you've got to comply, mate. Let's go for it. And it all worked out fine. If we didn't respond appropriately, take responsibility, we could have hit that aeroplane. And despite the fact that even my experience, my heart was beating quite fast. I was thinking, stay on top of this. What does your training teach you? Breathe properly, get my physiology sorted out. What did I learn in the simulator? Taught by people like Mark to me, all right, you know how to do this. So get yourself sorted and away we go. And 11 minutes that flight was to get ourselves on the deck in Chicago O'Hare. And then afterwards it's like, okay, time to breathe. Yeah. Time to breathe now. Right. What happened there? And okay, am I the hero saying, yeah, great? No, I still felt the fear of things going wrong. I felt that the warning signals, the cautionary ambers, if you don't do something now, we might head into the wrong direction. And then, right, you got to do something, mate. Otherwise you're going to be in trouble. Going away and thinking, yeah, I probably could have done better. I could have said more clear things on the radio, but I was dealing with a lot of things going on at the time. How do I go away and not criticize myself or the other person for not doing a perfect job? How do I build that into my repertoire for the next time I do it? And I think that's a great metaphor for life generally. We hit these emergencies, and it's not a shameful thing to get things wrong, to fail. It's a wonderful opportunity to put it in the logbook of experience and think, right, how am I going to fuel myself up and take off again in my journey through life? And I see that with you, because you've gone beyond the stage of supporting other people in a flight deck, and now you're helping airlines set up. So you're inherently taking lots of risky decisions, but learning how to respond ably to them when those red signals do hit you. I mean, when you feel as though things aren't going well for you, how do you reset yourself and get yourself back in the greens?
Yeah, it's there's 2 levels to this. One is in sort of the environment or organizational environment where the reds crop up and you got to deal with them. And quite often it's one little action that's required just to avoid it, or it could be several things that need to be done. But at the end of it, I think it's crucially important. It's in your personal life as well. If something went horribly wrong, you've got to just sit down at some point, be it over a cup of coffee, or if you smoke, have a cigarette or a glass of wine. It doesn't really matter what you do. You've got to think about what happened. Why did that happen? What was the root cause of it? And how can I correct it? And I think that is one of the biggest things I've learned from having been involved with safety and compliance for so long, is that actually people tend to always treat the symptoms rather than the root cause. You know, if you go to the doctor and you say, I've got a headache, he'll give you paracetamol. He hasn't even for 1 second looked at your root cause for that headache. He's just giving you something to treat the symptom. And, you know, if something goes wrong in an airline, time and time again, I see people treat symptoms, but not the root cause. So if you have a personnel problem, which you're going to have in the airlines, in any industry, you're going to have personnel problems. And actually, at the end of it, what you've done is you've probably treated the symptom, but then you've got to think about, okay, so how did that person get into our company? What was that process? Is that good enough? Is it robust enough? Could we have filtered this out? Could we have stopped this from happening? And that is a process that's quite often forgotten. I had it literally just yesterday where we were discussing something in the company. And at the end of it, they were ready to log off. And I said, so actually, hang on a minute, guys, let's just review how this happened. Why did this happen? What was the root cause of it? Can we steer that? Can we improve the process? And can we avoid that from happening again? I think if you set that sort of a culture where one of the managers said, oh, I think that was my mistake. And actually, I'm not really that interested if it was your mistake, my mistake, whoever's mistake. That's not really what's at play here. What's at play is, what do we do with it? How do we either recover from it? How do we make it better, more robust? How do we stop that from happening again? And I think, to use a typical sort of safety kind of a buzzword, which is just culture. Actually, to me, that is just culture, is where you analyze, you look at why it happened, and you try and make it better. And along the way, you want to hope that the people actually learn from that experience, rather than them walking away and feeling a bit so deflated and, oh, I've just had a bollocking from my manager, or I think the just culture is all about you trying to, again, create that environment and making sure that people learn. If they don't learn, it's wasted. It's wasted time. Totally wasted time. Now, if they were given the opportunity time and time again to learn, but they're not learning, deliberately not wanting to learn, that's a different matter. And again, you've then got to go down that path of, where did this go wrong? Well, how is this person in our company? And you bring it right back to the beginning. What was the process that we used in order to bring this person in? Why did we not see this sort of behavior earlier? You see what I mean? So it's just a different way of dealing with things. Is if you can, again, leave your egos at home and say, well, I wouldn't have made this decision. That is really, that's not going to help anybody. It's not conducive to making it better. But if people make mistakes, and they always make mistakes, I make mistakes, I make them daily. But you got to stop and think, why did that happen? What can I do better? How can I improve this?
I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. And what coming across here is the avoidance of blame and shame, which is an obvious thing, and we do it, and the ego teaches us to do that, and we don't realize we're doing it. I should have done something better. You should have done something better. We're either blaming ourselves or we're blaming somebody else, and either way, we're ashamed of ourselves or subconsciously making the other person feel ashamed of themselves. And of course, all you do is send yourself into the shadows or send somebody else into the shadows, and then you're in constant fear of being hit by a sniper. Yeah. You have no idea. There's no light being shone on it.
Yeah, I think my dad summed it up quite nicely one day, and he said to me, he said, Mark, if you as a manager point the finger at somebody, I'll try and show you on the screen. So you point the finger. Is there one finger points to the person? Three of them, I'll do it this way. Three of them point to yourself. One points upstairs. He said, I'm not sure where that one's pointing. He said, but it's there. And he wasn't a religious person.
Absolutely love it.
He said, when you're pointing the finger, he said, three fingers are pointing at yourself. He said, so if something goes wrong, actually it could well be you that created an environment why it went wrong. He said, so pointing the finger, he said, is almost always a pointless exercise. Excuse the pun.
That's absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And we talked about that before, and you've told me about that, and I've always think that's really powerful. And again, there's criticism. And one of my aviation analogies is that if we criticize and complain, we end up crashing. But if we compliment and encourage, then we end up cruising towards our landing spot, our destination, the chosen landing spot. So it's very easy to criticize and complain, and we're just going to crash. Somebody's going to crash. We're going to crash. They're going to crash. We're all going on this journey together. We're all part of life together. We're human beings. We're not black, white, rich, poor, male, female. We're just human beings going in the right direction together. And of course, if we complain and if we compliment and encourage, then we're going to be cruising together. It's absolutely brilliant. But we don't realize that. We're trying to protect ourselves by, if we are unsure, emotionally unsure, we're living in basic fear because of our emotional system or our ego, our limbic system, then we inherently have to try and bring other people down by criticizing. And I've thought about this since we talked about a while. I sit there and sometimes I think, right, what does that mean? So you've got this thing going on here. You've got a bullet ready to go at some point, and we can either pull the trigger and send something. And you've got 3 fingers, so it's three incredibly powerful bullets. We've got a choice. Is that bullet going to be to bring somebody down or to inflate somebody, promote other people's personality? So what do we want to put in our chamber when we're firing something at somebody? Is it the potential to improve the way people feel about themselves? What's our purpose in life? For me, it's doing what I can to give somebody the opportunity to feel better about themselves. I can't make anybody else feel better about themselves. All I can do is stick something in my chamber, my gun, and pull the trigger to give them that sense of inflation rather than to bring them down. And of course, when in the whole public speaking thing, as you probably well know, is don't point your finger at people, is just to include people that, have the whole body language type thing, create the environment. I think you're right. In terms of a system, we've done our best now to help people feel better about themselves. Yeah. The result of that is that they have a better probability of enjoying life. If you enjoy life, then you have more creative options and you'll find solutions.
I agree.
But, every now and then somebody slips through the net and you think, well, actually, we can't be responsible for everybody. The system cannot be responsible for everybody. Has to take responsibility for themselves to do something about it. And I still feel, am I subconsciously, unconsciously blaming a system or blaming my background or blaming, I'm a white heterosexual male. Is that the reason I'm behaving like this? No, actually. But it's incredibly difficult to do, isn't it? It's incredibly difficult to point the finger at yourself and add potential to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most difficult things to do. And I think trying to be honest with yourself and to say, well, actually, take somebody who walks into a room and people sort of like after 5 minutes, they don't really want to talk to them anymore because everybody goes, ooh, what's going on here? I can guarantee you that person, when they walk out, will not reflect on that moment. They will be blaming those people and say, oh, they were not particularly nice, or they're not very welcoming, or whatever it is. They don't have a clue that it's actually they themselves who created an environment in which people went, ooh, we're not comfortable with this. It's human behavior, isn't it? Somebody walks in, is particularly loud or noisy, or doesn't allow other people to speak, or talks over people. It doesn't go down well. But if you then do that time and time again, at what point are you going to look in the mirror and just say, what am I actually looking at here? What is that person achieving? Or how does that person influence other people? Because it can't be pleasant, can it? If you walk into a room and people sort of try and avoid you or become uncomfortable or just stop talking to you. And I always think, take 5 minutes, literally take 5 minutes, have a little think of what you just did and how did that work for you? Did it work? Not particularly. It's a very difficult thing to do. And I think trying to not point a finger or trying to create an environment where it went wrong. It went wrong. Now what we're going to do about it, how we're going to recover, how we're going to learn, how we're going to make it better. If you can do that, I think then people will respect that environment to work in. I think that's
absolutely. Yeah.
It becomes more of a development kind of a thing, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think you're right in the fact, how do we be honest with ourselves? Well, in our business, you've been in the simulator as an examiner and instructor and in the aeroplane. At the end of the session, we sit down. So what do you think? How did it go?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And we have to debrief. We have to debrief as honestly as possible.
Yeah.
Interestingly, one of my concepts is I'm a coach at a cricket club, and obviously I'm a parent and things like that. And I try to start out with how did that feel? I mean, you can say, how did that go? But actually, how did that feel? and this is the root of emotional intelligence, did you have the dose, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, which is the great parasympathetic side of our system. In other words, you're going in the right direction. This is a good thing. This is going to keep you alive. Or were you hit by the sympathetic side of your autonomic nervous system? In other words, your fight and fly thing, where you hit by the massive injections of cortisol, stress drug, and adrenaline and noradrenaline to tell you you're failing at this situation. In other words, trying to avoid that the next time. But the interesting thing is that in terms of reflection and debriefing, I don't know whether you find this in the realm of teaching and examining, is that the automatic thing to do is to bend on the negative side. I got this wrong. This didn't go well. Should have done better, and all the rest of it. It's like, and I say this to my guys, it's like, shut the fuck up, excuse my language, is that I want to hear everything that's gone well for you. I want to hear the 99% of stuff that's gone well. And so many people are like, oh, well, I did this, but then I got that. It's like, no buts. I don't want to hear the blame, the shame, and all that sort of shit, which is what you were talking about. I want to hear how it felt when you hit that lovely shot, or when you took that brilliant catch. Same in the simulator. When you got the engine failure under control and you didn't crash, how did it feel? Oh, yeah, it felt good. And how did it work? Right, let's go into the things that what can we work on, not what's shameful, not what's blame about. Yeah. But we have to default. We have to change our basic operating system away from the fight and fly system, which is obviously there to keep us alive. It's that we have to start thinking in the modern terms of what went well here that will create an incredible environment, a credible system for massive learning, massive opportunity, massive adventure.
Yeah.
And
it's a real skill, isn't it? The debriefing is a real skill. It's if you master facilitation well, then you are, by asking the right questions and by guiding the conversation, you're actually making them do the learning, because they're answering their own questions that they might have had. But in doing so, you also address the issues that they have in the front of their minds. So if you debrief in a way that is addressing what you've seen as an examiner, then you quite possibly, I would say probably 90% of all cases, you are not allowing them to address their own issues, because you've just started talking at them, and talking at people is a terrible thing, I think. If you can engage with them and say, okay, well, how did that go? And 99% of the times, as you say, they'll start talking about the bad things. And if you ask them a question and say to a first officer and say, so you were flying with Ben today, what did you particularly like about what Ben did? What are you gonna take away from that? What have you learned from Ben today? Well, actually, they're going to have to go down the positive path. They're not going to say, well, I thought he was dreadful. I didn't learn a thing. It's just how you set the scene, how you get them to talk to each other and make them learn and do that learning themselves, rather than the amount of times when I was in standards where you go and observe an instructor, and he is that particular instructor that will always talk about a particular system because he knows it so well. It's his little one thing that he can really shine about, and he will deliver that. If you ask him or not, he will deliver that every single sim session because it makes him feel good. It's that instructor that is creating that environment in which he can teach, but he's doing nothing for the students whatsoever. And how do you then develop that instructor is quite a difficult thing. And you just got to almost like make them realize the fact that in order to become that better instructor, to become that instructor that is capable of creating an environment, is that you're going to have to challenge yourself. You're going to have to step away from that little one pet rock that you have where you go like, look at me, how knowledgeable I am on the hydraulics. Well, actually, next sim session, try and do something on electrics, or try and do something on engine failure after takeoff. How can you make that easier for people? Or anything and anything. You got to continuously challenge yourself to not just be that one single dimensional kind of an instructor that knows a little bit about one subject. You've got to try and almost make yourself feel uncomfortable every single time you go in the simulator in order to improve and in order to become that better instructor. Because if you feel uncomfortable, you then have that opportunity to afterwards say, did that work? What could I have done better? And that's how you improve. It's not teaching the same thing time and time again, if people want to hear it or not. We see them all the time. I'm sure you've seen them, Ben. These guys, you get in the simulator with them, and they will have this pre-rehearsed, almost kind of a spiel that they're going to talk to you if you like it or not. And when you interrupt them, they just sort of like ignore you because you're interrupting their flow. Yeah, I despair when I see that. But it's
and that's the whole limited mindset. It's the whole fixed mindset versus the growth mindset, the opportunity mindset, and understanding that inherently we grew and we've evolved over millions of years because we were permanently outside of our comfort zone until very recently. We're in a very cushy situation, and even actually. Now in an airplane. Yeah, I mean, that's the trouble, because it means that we don't actually have to go out and challenge ourselves at all. But we need now to make the choice to do that. And I think you're right, is that you only ever grow, the muscle only ever grows if you exercise it and make it feel uncomfortable. You get in the gym. If you're sitting there and you're not sweating and you're looking at your phone the whole time and everyone else is sweating, well, they're developing something. Their hard work and their pain and strain is leading to something. And I think you're right in terms of psychology and our emotions is face up to that. Why are we staying in the comfort zone? Well, because of fear. Our basic system is telling us don't put yourself in that fearful situation. The executive brain, the smart brain will say, actually, you're not going to evolve or develop as an individual and help as many people as possible unless you do that. And that's the seat of emotional understanding. Why? And again, how do we learn the best? We remember things from our emotions. So when something goes wrong and our fear kicks in, it stamps something in our brain that will remind you the next time this was a dangerous situation, don't do it again. When something is beautiful, the great elixir of love and affection and connection and excitement, it's going to be like, that was really exciting last time. It's going to be the same again. That is our basic system steering us in the right direction. But if we are always trying to stay small and avoid the fear, we're going to be stuck in a cave. We're not going to develop, and then we are going to die out. And of course, the training captain who only concentrates on the electrics will die out.
Absolutely. And I remember it vividly when I first became an instructor back in Los Angeles in 1994. I had to read this book that was called the Flight Instructor's Guide to Instruction, or whatever it was called. It was a brilliant book. It had the 5 laws of learning in there, and 2 of those were the law of effect and the law of intensity. And actually, it spoke about readiness to learn, and it spoke about Maslow's theory, where you've got all the different levels, where you have to have social security and you have to have friends and this and the other. And then the levels that really particularly were of interest to me were the egotistical levels, and then the self-fulfillment level, which is right at the top, of course. And actually, if you divide the ego needs that we have into 2, I always say it's level 5A and level 5B. If you're a level 5A kind of instructor, then you are still that guy who's got that one particular subject that makes him feel better. He is the one who creates an environment in which he can teach because it makes him feel better. So he's still after his own egotistical needs. Whereas when you get to the level 5B, you start to understand that if you create an environment in which those people learn, and you see the light bulbs go on and they come out and they go, oh my God, I've learned something. Wow. That actually is a different level of kind of a satisfaction of your ego. It's not them telling you how wonderful you are. You've actually seen them improve, and you've seen them do better, and you see that they've actually been developed. That is a completely different satisfaction. And actually, I used to call that the 5A level. And then when you go into the self-fulfillment level, you can then almost create an environment in which you already know the outcome. You know the light bulb's going to go on because, you've made sure that you use those laws of learning. You've made it intense. You've made it sort of like an environment in which you first get them ready. You need to get them ready for what you want them to learn. And if you actually get them into a scenario where they go, oh, what do we do now? And then you stop the sim and you make that learning happen. Now you've got them right between the eyes. And that is, I think, is if you can understand that Maslow's theory as an instructor, I think you're halfway there. It's such a powerful thing. So it's
incredibly powerful. And I love Maslow as well, that whole idea actually at the top level. And it's the same replication as spiritualism, for example. I think about and philosophy. Carl Jung, he talked about the 4 stages of humans. The first stage is the athlete. Look at me, aren't I great? And I've got some value because I look strong, and I'm not going to be rejected because I might be useful to the tribe, to the community. The second stage is, well, look at the trophies that I've got. I've achieved this. I've gone out and I captured the beast, so I'm still valuable to the community, aren't I? And then the third stage is like, hang on a minute, I've got a load of trophies and I'm trying to shove these up people's nose to convince them how valuable I am. And it's all me trying to prove myself. And it's an basic emotional need. Now, what is the statement? He talked about the third stage as the statement. What am I actually doing that's benefiting as many people as possible? And it's like, okay, well, now I need to be the mentor. Now I need to be the instructor. And the fourth stage, and still there is a little bit of an egotistical side to that, as you're saying, the 5A, that's still a little bit egotistical because I've got to be valuable by providing mentorship and coaching to other skills, to other people. The 5B is represented by Jung's fourth stage, which is the spiritual side. And depending on whether people think, well, I don't understand what spirituality is, I tend to refer to it as social wisdom, because you realize actually I've gone beyond my own emotional need. I've really developed my own personal intelligence. I'm self-aware. I can regulate my emotions. I can respond ably to the situation. And now it's about how do I create that environment for learning, as you've said, the social intelligence, the spiritual intelligence. And I think it's that highest level of understanding we are an intrinsic part of something way, way, way bigger than we can possibly imagine. And it might be a tiny, we're a tiny little spark, but isn't that valuable when we start putting it with the spark of other people, and the legacy will go on down the generations. And it's an incredibly exciting idea to get to. The idea that we're there to help other people, for me, is incredibly exciting rather than just proving my bloody self.
Yeah. I think that's such an empty kind of a satisfaction. It's for me, it doesn't do anything. I'd far rather have people who, let's say, in the sim environment or in the working environment, who come out of the day thinking they've been developed, they've learned something. It was in a pleasant environment. We've had a laugh, and we've all learned something, including me. Actually, quite often when I'm teaching something, I learn something because, again, you'll see that the way I taught it yesterday didn't work for these people. So you're going to have to adjust that a little bit, and you just got to keep that dynamicism. And I think that's the same in the airline environment. If you're in management, you've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to almost use those laws of learning, where you've got to be able to put something in place that if one of your people isn't learning something or can't do something or isn't quite capable of something, you've got to get them ready first before you make them do the learning. They've got to be ready to learn. If they're not ready to learn, it's not going to get received. It's not going to go through. It's not, you're not going to have that impact. They need to realize that they need to do the learning in the first place. And if you can make them realize that, then they become that sponge again. It's very simple. It's not rocket science, but I thought it's so powerful in that book that I read back in '94. And I've based the rest of everything I did in terms of teaching, in terms of being a manager, in terms of anything that you do. It's got to be in that kind of an environment, because otherwise it just won't work.
Yeah, so that's the two. Yeah, absolutely. This is a two-part process, is that we're both responsible. The student is responsible for the outcome, and the teacher, the leader, the inspirer is responsible for creating the atmosphere. As what you said, we can't blame each other if things go wrong. All we can do is lead ourselves down to that situation of the greatest possibility or probability that we're we're going on this path together. It takes the captain and the co-pilot, and the captain is they're creating an environment. The co-pilot is taking responsibility for himself. And I think that, but talking about that is that even though you're in a very serious senior position and you've gone way beyond the instructor to the helping other airlines set up, which is very critical because the margins for error in an aeroplane in terms of safety can be very fine, but the margins for an airline coming down and everybody losing their job and their income, etc., can be massive. So you're in a position of taking risk and advising. How do you deal with that situation when you can be highly criticized still because somebody else has potentially failed, or when the finger is pointed at you, for example? How do you deal with that intense pressure? Because we all feel that. We all feel as though people are pointing the finger at us and trying to blame us for things that have gone wrong. Is it our fault? What can we do? How do we avoid being emotionally hijacked and going into ego defense? What would you do if somebody gave you that intense pressure of you're the fault, Mark?
Yeah, again, you've got to understand accountability. Accountability is not something that's particularly well understood, and a lot of people avoid it. The bug doesn't stop with them, that kind of mentality. And I think if you go into these kind of things where you look at what the decision has to be and what needs to be done, and you set it up. So like you set out your stall and you say, right, so these things need to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. There have to be points within that process where you control the process in the first place. Now, if you don't control the process, it's going to go off on a tangent. So one of the issues we had with this particular startup was that there was an incredibly short time frame we had to get it up and running. So we could not afford to get people to go off on a tangent, for example. So when there were certain elements of decision making to be done, you've got to then get them into the room and say, right, we're going to make that decision and we're going to make it in the next half an hour. We're not going to go around the houses again and again and again. But at the end of it, it has to be what I call the safe compromise. So you haven't got infinite resources as an airline startup because you can only spend that money once. But within that resource, you've got to come up with a safe kind of environment where we can operate that airplane safely. But you can't eliminate all risk, as we've already spoken about. It's impossible to eliminate all risks. And I've seen managers who try to eliminate too much of that risk, where it became, from a resource point of view, impossible to do. So there's a couple of things here. So you've got to understand that what is that safe compromise? You've got to understand the control points within the process that you've actually started. How do you control that? And then if you have those control posts, if you want to call them that, then actually you can spot the failure before they will happen. So the chances of you as the ultimate responsible person for that whole process is going to get a bollocking from whoever is investing in that particular process. You've actually mitigated against that. But if it does happen, you've got to have the balls to say, buck stops with me. I'm going to sort this out. Yeah, I made a mistake. Yeah, we're going to see why it went wrong. And of course, that's happened. It does happen. And this is how we learn. But if we then go on the defensive, which you see a lot of people do, they go on the defensive, actually, you're not learning. Again, you're not going to get better next time because you've just blocked off the learning opportunity that you have when you do make a failure. A friend of mine used to always say, failure is the first attempt in learning. It's a bit of a just one of these management kind of phrases I'm not particularly keen on, but it does have a bit of truth in it, is that actually the buck does stop with you. If you are an accountable manager or if you are a nominated person, the buck stops with you. You're going to be the one that stands up in the dock and defends what you did. It's you, because that's what the CA signed the paperwork for, to say you're responsible. So take that responsibility. And if it goes wrong and the people that work with you or that are working for you, or whichever way you want to look at that, if something goes wrong, it's you as a nominated person or the accountable manager that is responsible for that. And if you are comfortable in saying, actually, guys, the buck does stop with me, this is me, I'm in charge, and I will take the flak. I will take that flak. And I've had to do that when things had not been done, even though they'd been asked to be done. And then they hadn't been done. And then the boss goes, "Why hasn't this been done?" I said, "Well, it's my department. I'm responsible. I didn't check that if it had been done or not." And as long as you've got a solution to the problem, and quite often, if you are honest about it and actually turn around to the boss and say, "Yep, that was me. Sorry. It's the people that worked for me. It didn't go as planned, but this is what we're going to do about it," then yeah, they might rant and rave, but that's a short-term thing. It's quite often not personal. It's just a reaction to what's happened. But it again comes down to the recovery, and if you can, but you learn over time. You learn over time to anticipate that kind of stuff. So it's dealing with the aviation authorities. It's going to take a long time for them to review those manuals, and if you present a manual that isn't actually in accordance with the regulation or in the format that the regulation requires you to present it at, and you send that to the CAA, guess what? It's going to come back to you. So that's a control point there and then. For example, I had not too long ago, I was sent a manual by somebody who wanted to present that to the CAA. It was in a very short time frame, and I looked at the manual and said, "It's not in the right format." I said, "It's a good manual and there's fantastic stuff in it, but it's not in the right format. They're going to send it back to you. So why don't you spend an extra week just putting it in the right format so that the inspector has an easy job of just going tick, 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 tick. Yeah, okay, this manual is in the right format. The content is good, and it gets approved in half the time." But because normally what happens with the CAA, is that it takes them quite a few weeks to get it through their own processes to then be allocated to the inspector, who will then go through it. And the moment he sees it's not in the right format, he immediately goes, "Okay, this is not in the right format." And then he sees another bit that's not in the right format. And then he goes, "Well, I haven't got the time for this." And he sends it back to you. How much time have you just wasted? You've wasted those 3 weeks that you were waiting for him to look at it in the first place. And now he sent it back to you. Now you have to send it back to him. And there's going to be another 3 weeks of wasted time before he then looks at it again. So you've actually wasted 6 weeks. Well, actually, if you took 1 week of that 6 to do it properly in the first place, you've actually saved yourself 5 weeks. Does that make sense? Yeah.
It does, really, because it comes back to the whole idea of the environment. Yeah. You're creating the environment to facilitate the smooth running of a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's quite often you see meetings and people sit there in a meeting and they decide this, then the other, and they say, "Okay, everybody all right?" "Yeah, everybody all right." And they all log off, and you go, when are these things going to be done? Nobody actually took any ownership of all the things that we decided they were going to do. And so at the end of a meeting, I always want to know, I said, "Okay, so you said you were going to do this. When is that going to happen? When are you going to do that?" And then they go, "Oh yeah, I'll do it tomorrow." And you go like, whoa, hang on a minute. Is that realistic? Because you've got all your other bits and pieces to do still. So actually, I'd much rather you say on a Monday to me, "I'll get it to you on Friday," rather than saying, "I'll get it to you on Tuesday," and then don't get it to me on Tuesday, because that doesn't work. So it's got to be a realistic sort of a time frame. So as a manager, you're going to have to, when somebody says to me, "I'll get it to you on this day," I actually sit back and think, really? Is that realistic? I'd rather you take an extra day so that I know it actually comes when I want it to come in, not because, "Oh yeah, but I got called away, or my cat was sick, or my whatever it is." The actual logistics of deciding a timeline is very interesting. People tend to always be very theoretical about that. So if you asked, for example, somebody in a flight ops department, and you say to him, "So you're the head of fleet of this particular department. How many hours do you have in a week to do your job?" And he'll go 40. "I work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day." Right. Okay. So out of those 40 hours, then how many phone calls do you get that take you away from what you really wanted to do? How many people come up to your desk that come and talk to you, that distract you? How many times do how long do you spend at lunch? How long do you spend in the toilet? How much do you spend on social media whilst you are in your job? And actually, if you then look at, the 40 hours you first mentioned, that is, I call that the gross hours. but the net hours are probably only about 30% of that. If you then look at all the projects that this guy is working on, if he's, for example, working on the Innsbruck program and he's working on, for example, introduction of RMPAR, or he's introducing this, or he's got all these different projects, and he doesn't actually know how long each of those projects last and what the capacity SAP is on those 30 hours he actually has, the actual net hours to do those jobs. Well, actually, if you looked at all of that and you just quickly analyzed it, even if you did it on the back of a fag packet, you quite quickly see that you need more capacity in your department. And then the manager comes in and says, actually, could you just do this as well? And he goes, yes, boss, I'll do that. When he's already short of hours. And that's where the plate spinning starts and the plates end up on the floor. So it's that you've got to have that realism. You've got to be able to analyze the actual physical net time that somebody has. If I'm working from home, I get more done than if I'm in the office, because I just know people will come to me. They'll need advice about this. They need advice about that. Now, there has to be a balance. Of course, you got to be in the office to help people along, but you've got to go in there with that realism to say, well, actually, I'm going in the office today. The things that I might want to do, I'm probably not going to be able to do, but I'm going to be able to steer the team. And if from their perspective, things are going to start happening again. So that is the crucial sort of balance that you've got to strike.
Yeah, creating the atmosphere for other people to develop their potential, but also taking accountability for our own particular learning. Again, you're playing the dual role within. We're playing the dual role within ourselves, aren't we? And I think just going back to what the whole criticism thing, and it is not taking things personally when we get the criticism of things wrong. It's actually, I'm going to take accountability for my situation. I can't get everything perfect, but how do we not get hijacked by the finger pointing? And how do we think, okay, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to learn and create something the next time, as opposed to living in fear of being criticized. And I think most people, it's the same as in social and corporate worlds are like that.
And it's the same as we've spoken about this before, Ben. It's about the silo thinking, which I put a post on LinkedIn about not too long ago, because I see this time and time again where people they think that because they're in charge of a department that it is their department. I think that's the wrong way of looking at things. So when take the airline, for example, you've got all these different departments. You've got your flight ops, ground ops, you've got your HR, you've got your safety compliance, you've got camo, you've got all those different departments. And people are in charge of those areas as nominated persons. But if you actually look at that department as your department, actually you immediately entering the silo. If you look at your department as a part of a bigger entity that is only there in order to get the aircraft into the air safely, and for the boys and girls that are on the call phase, the pilots and the cabin crew, and the engineers on the front line, for them to do their jobs, again, it has to be that environment in which they can do that safely. That is what your department is there for. Now, the fact you're in charge of it doesn't mean it's your department. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the company as a whole. And if you can think about it that way, then your decision making will change, because you will almost, when something needs to be done, you will immediately think, how does that work out for the entire company? So if I change a software system in flight ops, I can guarantee you that will have an impact on ground ops. Guaranteed. And it will have an impact on the boys and girls on the line. So if I just introduce it without telling anybody at all, guess what a car crash that would be. And this happens time and time again, where people look at their own departments and they go, oh, but this is my department. And you ask them something and you say, could you do this? And say, oh, but that's not in my remit, or that's not in my budget. Oh, man, really? It is in your budget. It's the airline's budget. Yes, you might have your own little budget to run your department, but actually at the end of the day, if something needs doing and you're the SME in that particular case, even if it doesn't say in your job spec, if it is for the benefit of the company and you're the only one who can do it, guess what? You got to do it, because it is for the benefit of everybody. And I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks within companies as a whole, is that silo thinking is, oh, I'm doing this for my department, or I'm building my department. I want my department to be the best in the company. Yeah, that's all good stuff. But your department is there for the greater good. It's not there for you as a manager to have the best department. Yeah. Your department is still there to get that airplane in the air safely. And I think if you look at the NHS, for example, I think that is the biggest problem in the NHS, is that silo thinking is everywhere, on every level. And that's why they can't get anything done. That's why they're in such turmoil. Nobody thinks that actually everything we do is for that patient on that table or in that bed. And if they can start grasping that, then their whole decision maker will change, and the whole sort of philosophy will change, the culture will change, and there will be, it will become a better place. But unless they actually understand how silo thinking is one of the biggest sort of stoppers in development and progress and ability to deliver in a company, you're on a losing streak if you don't understand that.
I think you're right, and your LinkedIn post points out the fact that silo effectively stands for isolation. You're isolating yourself, and we can bring any form of labeling in duality, polarity, of making basically boxing ourselves in to something, and of course then you forget the link. And if I think back, I said it on the LinkedIn post in response, is that it reminds me of me and myself. If I start to box myself off, if I box my emotional side off from my physical side, or from my sort of social side, my spiritual side, then I'm not going to be able to take off. I'm not going to be able to take off safely and land as an individual safely if I'm not bringing in this holistic understanding of how everything is connected. But you've got to have that long-term, you've got to have that vision in the future. And like, what are we trying to achieve here? And how does everything fit in? And that sense of, that's absolutely brilliant. We're all going together. And I think we do label each other, and we compare each other, thinking, I need to prove a personal point. I need to pat by telling this person I'm better than them. And of course, nobody bloody wins at the end of the day. No. Everybody is inefficient. Everybody crashes.
Yeah, it's almost a bit like the black box thinking kind of theory. I read this great book once, and this guy was saying that actually when you are doing something in your job, let's say the two of us go flying, Ben, and we're sitting in the cockpit, that's our little black box, isn't it? It's our little environment that you and me are operating in. But actually, when you then open the box up, there is a bigger box there, because there's cabin crew behind us and passengers behind it. So all of a sudden, we're now talking about two boxes that actually merges into one bigger box. But the decisions we make in that little box in the front has an influence on the other box behind us. But those two boxes, if they are affected and interconnected, then all of a sudden, if you now add ATC into that, and the company and other aircraft around us, all of a sudden there's many more boxes there. If you bring that down to a level of, for example, let's take the Mars factory, where they've got several production lines, They've got Twix, they've got Mars, they've got Snickers, they've got whatever else they've got. And actually, each one of those production lines has got packing stations, for example, or they've got where the chocolate comes on, and bits and pieces that I had to do an analysis in that factory once when I was still doing business administration. And actually, I looked at all those different entities as little boxes within a bigger box. And quite often it almost becomes that sort of like that present you get where you open this massive box and there's another box inside, and then there's another box inside, another box inside. But actually, if you can almost think of it that way, where you look at the black box approach is what I call it, and you say, my cockpit is a black box, but if I open that box, what else is there outside of my box? And what influence will I have on the other boxes if I make this decision right now? Now, some people use grade, some people use DODA in order to do that. But to me, the essence of all of that is that black box approach, is where you analyze and see what other boxes. So you're going to have a look in all those boxes before you do anything. And if you can think of it that way, actually that is quite a powerful way of considering everything that's around you. So you come out of your own little box, open the box, go and have a look what else is there. Is there another box that I could open? Yeah, there's another box. Hey, there's another box. Bloody hell, there's another one. Oh my God, there's boxes galore here. How do I consider all of them? And then once you've done all that and you've run out of boxes, you then come back in. You come back into your own little box and you say, well, okay, so I've seen all these boxes here. They've all got these bits and pieces that they need. If I make this decision, how is each box now going to be affected? And I call that a black box approach. It's my own little analogy, but it's always worked for me. It's always worked for me. I always liked it.
I think that's right, and you're absolutely right. And the black box thinking was Matthew Said's book, and I think that was maybe the one that you were talking about. I had Christo Hudson on a couple of sessions before, and his concept is called the black box approach. He was a training captain for Flybe and had a mental health crisis during COVID, and felt quite suicidal, and now he runs an organization called the Black Box Approach, which is suicide prevention and mental health and personal development. I think it's absolutely brilliant. And for me, I love that too, because we're pilots. We like missions. We like practicalities. And for me, you've got two black boxes in an aeroplane. You've got one that's analyzing the aircraft data, all the readings of the fuel and the electrics and the hydraulics, etc. And you've got one that's monitoring our talk between each other and with air traffic control, so communication. So we've got to have the data, the data, the particular analysis, but then we've got to understand the analytical understanding of our communication and how we're impacting each other, what we are doing to encourage the other person to feel, whether we're attacking them, whether we're encouraging them to find the very best in themselves. And I think that, for me, same thing for you, is the absolute black box approach, without criticism, without judgment, the just culture, without the finger pointing. That I don't care about blame and shame. I'm not interested about that. I want to come up with a bloody solution. So, but we're thinking, Mark, what are we, an hour and 20 minutes into it?
Yeah.
You're in LA, 8 hours behind. You've got a big schedule ahead, you know, and I've got a few things to attend to. But what I'd like to finish off now, and you're the first person I've given you warning for about my concept of what's your smell. And you'll understand is that it comes from the what's your smell is very direct, isn't it? But the MEL part of it, the middle bit, is the minimum equipment list. And for me, the MEL is music, exercise, and laughter. And the L on the end of that is learning. And the front part is shit. As people who listen to this podcast will understand, for me, shit is not a terrible thing. It's a bloody fertilizer. Every time life is shit or something goes wrong, you choose to use that as fertilizer for the learning process to go on and achieve and develop and grow in another area. So what is your smell? What are the few things, the music, exercise, laughter idea that I use to get you and keep you in the greens and get you out of the reds when they hit you? Have you got a few tools that you use of your own?
Yeah. I've got a wonderful wife. I've got two fantastic kids who I absolutely love, seeing them grow up to 19 and 17. And, my son is off traveling, and you see he's been in the Ritz in Macau because a friend of his dad had booked him a room there, and you just go, you look, he's sold. But it just, wow. It's wonderful to see him traveling the world on his own. And, my daughter is a fantastic horse rider, and to see her achieve things, that to me is, my wife is working with an airline. She loves that. She works in first class. She's now becoming studying for a sommelier, and that's, of course. So, wow. Fantastic, that she takes that on. We've got two brilliant little dogs, two Cocker Spaniels. They are hilarious. They're always happy to see you, whatever happens. You teach them something one day, and the next day they're completely forgotten. They will die half trained, but they are hilarious.
Brilliant.
Then,
lovely.
Yeah, I like to go to the gym. It's a time to reflect for me when I'm on a treadmill or I'm, just doing some whatever weights. And, then yeah, that's the exercise bit, of course. But, I love music, any type of music, absolutely anything, ranging from hard rock to country to hip hop to you name it, anything and anything really. So yeah, it's, and holidays. I love holidays, going different places, exploring. So yeah, it's, the other captain that I'm with here in Los Angeles and we've rented a car. We're going to drive all the way up to Big Bear in the mountains here in Los Angeles. So have a wander around the lake and going to have a look at that. Yeah, it's, that's a smell for me, really.
Brilliant. I love that. So keeping the imagination open, adventure, doing some personal exercise, and then understanding the value of seeing other people go off on their adventures and celebrating that and seeing the wonder in that. As you said, it's wonderful. I think that's a really lovely message to finish off with. Mark, really appreciate it, mate, honestly. And as I say, your impact on me encouraged me to feel much better about myself, created that learning environment, and I've gone on to try and replicate that environment that you created for me, and I'm eternally grateful for that. And let's continue to do that for as many people as possible. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me on this. It's been fun. It's been a good discussion.